York. Oh, wait, we're actually live.
There we are. Good morning, America.
No. Okay. Good morning. Well, not good morning, Jesus. Rough day.
Evening.
Good evening, people. America. This is the first congressional deliberation since well, it's been a while. We finally, the Senate pro tem, President pro tempore of the Senate has, and I agree to hold a congressional deliberation to further our relationship within the chambers, understand each other, hear out everyone within both chambers. What can we do to fix the well-being for the American people? What can we offer? What are some ideas? What are some proposals? And I hope this can run as smoothly as possible. Um, and let's see what every member or the members here presented have to say. I hope each and every one of you can speak uh, and give in your input and your thoughts. So that's all I have to say. And the President pro tempore of the Senate will address his statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first off, I'd like to indeed thank members of both chambers. I see over there that's the Senator Taft and Senator Sanders and Representative Stevens, Representative Miller, and Representative Davis. I just thank you all for being here. And yes, as Kenneth mentioned, we agreed to do this. And really, it was due in part because I said it's about time that I actually agreed to do this. Um, During my time as PPT, we have not done this. So I extend it to talk to the speaker and tell them, hey, let's go ahead and hold one. But I'm glad that we are. And this is to better, again, build a bridge between the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives. Um, it's very important that we have these congressional deliberations or whatever you want to call them so that we familiarize ourselves with each other as members of Congress. And so that at the end of the day, we leave here with a better understanding of where each chamber of Congress stands on particular issues. And going forward, how can we solve the issues that face our country? At the end of the day, it's not about our battles that we may or may not have. It's about the work of the American people. And that is the most important part of being a member of Congress. And I'm pretty sure any day we put country over party. And that's how it always has been. That's how it will continue to be. And I hope that going forward into this evening, we can have a very organized discussion about a wide variety of topics. Um, and hope that really everybody stays in order. Because let's be honest. Y'all know I don't have a problem with trying to cut you off. So uh, let's keep it together, keep it organized. Round one, let's fight.
Well, thank you, Senator McCann. Is there a member in the House of Representatives that wishes to speak and present their proposal to further discuss?
Uh, Mr. Speaker, I wish to.
The gentleman from Texas has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I'd like to say how proud I am to be alongside in this congressional deliberation, along honored members of both the House of Representatives and colleagues in the Senate. Now, what I would like to discuss, having the ear of both the Speaker of the House, the President pro tempore, and other high-ranking Senate and House members, is the utter need for major tax reform. This is something that I've pledged numerous times in my candidacy, and I assume, and I've seen in all of your candidacies, that there is need for a major tax reform. Now, there have been fluttering proposals, one of those being an income tax reform, actually written by the Speaker and myself. But of course, there are those who wish to not mess with the land value tax who wish to keep it around and believe it's an effective system. Now, either side, whether we support income tax or the land value tax or some other form, there's one truth that we need to realize, is that taxes as they stand across the board are too high. We right now, well, after the budget, have had a $3 trillion surplus. And what does that mean? It means the people are being taxed too high. The purpose of taxes is to fund the government. It's to be able to provide substantial funding for military, social programs, and the workings of Congress and other forms of the federal government. And when we are overtaxing our constituents by $3 trillion, it shows that we are doing over the purpose of those taxes. Therefore, I would like to bring up actually the proposal of the income tax authored by the Speaker of the House and myself that cuts the taxes paid by every single American by large amounts. Now, everyone can agree that the Speaker and I have had our differences, but if there's one thing that we can align on, is the simple fact that we need that major tax reform. Now, I'd like to go into it a bit. It forms at least, I believe it's 3 tax brackets, all of which are substantial. Go for if you earn more money, you are taxed at a higher percentage, or if you earn less money, you're taxed at a lower percentage. And it is fair within the fact that even if you're making $1 off from each tax bracket, it doesn't mean you're taxed another whole 10%. It means for the simple fact that actually your brackets and the amount that you make is set after the assumed tax rate. So therefore, someone making $730,000 isn't taxed so much that they would have been in the second tax bracket. This is a common sense solution to solve especially the economic crisis we're having right now. And what economic crisis is that? It's unemployment. Now, the simple fact of the matter is that lower taxes does decrease unemployment. Now, while some people believe that higher taxes would be better for the economy, it actually simply isn't true. As we see, a lot of with these company owners are able to use these tax cuts to be able to invest in companies. And what do they use that for? Creating jobs. As a matter of fact, the National Taxation Policy Institute in last year, 2018, found that lower tax reform actually means the median increase of 600,000 jobs in the first year of reform, and within the first decade of reform, as much as 3 to 6 million jobs. Therefore, we can massively decrease that unemployment rate from 5.1% to the low 2% to 1.5%. So all those who wish to have major economic reform, solve the unemployment crisis we're having, and allow for economic prosperity, I ask that you support this bold action by the Speaker and myself. Mr. Speaker, I wish to yield the floor.
Thank you. Is there any other member in the House of Representatives that wish to speak on the matter of the tax reform presented from the gentleman of Texas? No. Senator McCain, you can take over for the Senate.
All right. Thank you. Is there any member of the Senate that wishes to speak at this time?
I would like to speak. Yeah,
All right. Senator Taft.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. All right. So I want to, first of all, thank everybody for coming to this deliberation today. It is an honor to serve beside fellow colleagues in the House and the Senate. And I'd like to take this moment just to talk about that proposal. I don't think it's a terrible proposal. I would like to comment on the minority leader in the House's statement that that we're taxing too much based upon the $2 trillion surplus. I think most of us have agreed already that and it has been confirmed that the calculations on the LVT were way off. $7 trillion. They calculated that the U.S. federal government brought $7 trillion in from the federal tax revenue, which is ridiculous because in real life they collect just about $4 trillion. So adding approximately $3 trillion based only on land ownership is just absolutely absurd. So I would propose first, before we make any adjustments to the tax code, any tax reform, we should fix the LVT calculations first. And if the calculations still bring in a substantial amount of money, enough for the things we're we want to do. I think we should keep the LVT because I think the income tax is, if the income tax is not needed, it is immoral because it assumes that the government owns you and owns your wealth. And so I would like to advocate that. Now, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Yeah, Mr. President.
Senator Sanders.
Yeah.
My name was invoked.
The gentleman of Texas does not have the right to speak. The gentleman of Mr. Senator Sanders has the floor.
It's North Carolina, by the way. But yeah,
I knew that.
I agree with what Senator Taft said. While I support the reform and my name is on the bill as a sponsor, as a co-sponsor, I believe that a recalculation of the land value tax first before we push for this bold reform of taxing people's income. I think that we should work together as like in this meeting right now to push for a recalculation instead of the income tax because the land value tax has benefits, and a tax like the land value tax is a better alternative, in my opinion, than the income tax, which is a tax that should be reformed in real life. I agree with what Senator Taft says about it, about the income tax and how it is kind of immoral. I think that, yeah, I pretty much said what I had to say. Sorry, I got texted. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Mr. President, if I may,
He's not here.
Congressman,
the representative is out of order.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, if I may.
You may.
Thank you. So I believe we talked about this proposal in a meeting last week, or this week. And in that meeting, we discussed the, well, let me rephrase it. Secretary Fitzgerald talked about the cons of the proposal that has been brought to the floor by the minority leader of the House. And he went through and talked about the cons. And, after hearing what the secretary had to say, I told him that I understand, I hear what he's saying, and I'm going to put it this way. And you may disagree here, I don't care. Neither tax system is perfect. Okay? Neither tax system is perfect. I think moving forward, if we can't agree on the proposal that has been put forward by the minority, and let me put this on the record, I am not in favor of getting rid of the land value tax, nor am I opposed to it. There are many different roads we can go. If we can't agree to the income tax, then we need to go forward and do expansion of land value tax to figure that out. But I yield back.
Mr. Speaker and Mr. President, if I could have the floor.
You asked for the speaker.
So, well, I corrected myself, though.
We'll hear.
The gentleman, I believe, is from New York. Pennsylvania. The gentleman from Pennsylvania has the floor.
So, I know we're taking a look back at the system. And I agree. We definitely have to reevaluate the calculations before we even think about passing a new bill to drastically provide a tax cut and relief to the American people, which they so desperately deserve. So I think our first action, which it sounds like most of us agree, is to recalculate, as the GPS says, the land value tax and how much money to actually bring in the federal government. Because if it is not $7 trillion, and then we're in a bit of trouble with our spending that is very so frequent in Congress. I think almost every bill, there's at least spending in it some which way or how, I don't know how exactly, but almost every bill there is spending in it. Now, I passed a bill, and I think someone else did. I know that there was no spending in it, but it's like mostly 2/3 of all bills have spending in it. And if it turns out that we're not making $7 trillion, then we have an issue that needs to be addressed right away. So I think we need to find those recalculations before you even cut it. And then if it turns out that they are wrong, we have to address our spending crisis, which will turn into, because our debt will be high if they were wrong.
Mr. President.
I yield the floor.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. President.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Texas has the floor.
Damn it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd first like to address some of the arguments made by the senator from Wisconsin. The first of which I'd like to address, and actually was made by several of the congressmen here, is that we don't know the calculations. Well, shouldn't that be part of the very reason that we should repeal the land value tax? Is that time and time again, the calculations have been way off. It has seemed damn near impossible to be able to calculate the land value tax. Therefore, shouldn't there be an easier to calculate system in place, like the income tax, where there's a lot more substantial data and a real-life example to be able to make the best and most accurate calculation so we don't have a debt hike? Second, I'd like to address the another argument made from the senator from Wisconsin. He said that the income tax implies that the government can lay claim to your wealth and your personhood. Well, I believe that there is a point that I've addressed to the senator from Wisconsin and that he seems to be ignoring, is that the land value tax assumes that the government can lay claim to your property, which I believe is even more worthwhile than your income, or rather than the state owning 10% or 16 or 26% of your wealth. I think it's better to have them lay claim to that than your entire property basis. And while a small amount of property taxes are okay, by his own argumentation and his own logic, it would assume that, like I said, we, the federal government, can lay claim to his very home. So because of that, I think that the income tax would still be a lot better of a common sense proposal. But I'd also like to quickly just go ahead and touch back on the calculations. I do not believe that we should go ahead and try and recalculate, because how can we be sure that those calculations are going to be more accurate than the $7 trillion hike? Mr. Speaker, I yield the floor.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Can I have the floor?
Mr. President.
Can I respond to the,
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Mr. Speaker.
may I have the floor to respond to
President. Mr. President.
The members will be in order. Kenneth, am I allowed, Mr. Speaker, if I may?
You may.
All right. So I heard a mix of Senator Sanders and Senator Taft. I'm going to go with you first, Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just like to bring up a few points from the of what the gentleman from Texas said. They were lazy the last time they calculated the land value tax. They've admitted that before, and I think there's evidence showing that. There are actually 3 members in MEC who have claimed, at least, and I've seen one of them personally calculate a land value tax, and I believe the Congress and the Senate, working with those members who understand and know how to calculate it, instead of trying to calculate it ourselves, not knowing what we're doing, is a better path to take to recalculating it. And I think let's not replace something when we have the opportunity to fix it. Something that's working, that's bringing in a decent amount of revenue, a significant amount of revenue, but could still bring in a decent amount of revenue, is something that we should stick with. And I think an income tax is running away from a problem, like I've said before, that we can fix. And I think we shouldn't be so cowardly facing up against this big challenge. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, can I have the floor? Can I have the floor, Mr. President?
Senator Taft.
Thank you. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to respond to the representative from Texas. And the first point I'd like to make is that, number one, as far as the calculations goes, I think the senator from North Carolina, was it? Senator Sanders covered that pretty well as far as the calculations goes. However, my point was, I want to say first off, I am not necessarily a proponent of the LVT. I have criticized the land value tax on multiple occasions in a Senate hearing that I chaired a couple weeks ago for Mr. Ethan Fitzgerald. I asked him some tough questions about the LVT. I specifically asked him the questions about, does it unfairly punish landowners? Anyway, moving on from that point, what the gentleman from Texas said was that I thought the income tax is wrong because I assume that the government owns your wealth and lays a claim to that. And he says the LVT does the same for land. That's not the same case, because in the case of the LVT, land pre-exists any person's ownership of it. You do not pre-exist your own existence. So anyway, as far as that goes, it makes sense for the land value tax, because when you take land, when you take property, you are depriving other people of resources that they could have used, that could have benefited them too. So it only makes sense that you give back a little bit. It doesn't have to be a ridiculously high portion. It could be as small as necessary is what I would say. But once again, I am not certain that I support the LVT. All I'm saying is that we need to redo the calculations on the LVT, and if we just can't get good calculations, like the gentleman from Texas suggested, or the calculations don't provide enough revenue, then I will support the proposal that the speaker and the House Minority Leader brought up, because even though I think the income tax is immoral, I will see it as a necessary evil. So, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
All right, I'm gonna take it over to the I don't think I have anything to say just yet. Mr. Speaker.
Well, actually, Mr. President, can I be recognized?
Mr.
Sure, Senator Sanders.
Are we? Well, I guess we're not done with this argument. I'll yield the floor, Mr. President.
Okay, Mr. Speaker.
Does any member of the House wish to speak? Does any member of the House of Representatives wish to speak?
All right, then, Mr. President, can I have the floor?
Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to change the subject and turn it towards the the presidential military powers, and the fight that went on about a week ago, or in the middle of last week, of that proposal. And I have a proposal up in the House right now that's been stuck in the House for days. That I think was up for debate on the floor last I checked. And now that we're with House members, I'd just like to ask one of them to put it up for a vote and support revoking the presidential military authority, because the president should not be able to use our military, the people's military of the people's country, without congressional approval, because the Congress is the people's branch, and we should not be going to war or having a sole executive, a unitary executive, using his power to send military troops to a sovereign nation without checks and balances. And this is what the RPMAA does. And I ask every member to support this. And when it's in the Senate, I ask the other members to support it as well. I know that Senator McCann and Senator Taft are sponsors of that. So with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
So I'm going to interject here very quickly. So yeah, I spoke with Secretary Patrick, and after I went over a couple more things, in concluding, in his bill, I asked him to take me off as a sponsor of the bill. Now, you can think of it as this, and I know you may say, oh, just because you sponsor a bill means you're going to vote for it. That is not at all what it means. You could sponsor a bill, and at the end of the day, still end up not voting in favor of it. Now, me personally, I don't believe that the President of the United States, no matter who it is, should be able to put troops on the ground without congressional authorization. Now, that's common sense, okay? And so I asked the question to the members of the House because if what Senator Sanders is saying is true, why hasn't it been put up for vote? And that's the question. Why, if it's been in the House for and Senator Sanders will allow you to uh, clarify here. How long is your bill? You say your bill's been up in the House now?
Well, I don't have the exact date on that. I can go check right now, but I would assume for 3 or 4 days, maybe even 5, because I think it was like Wednesday or Tuesday when I first asked a representative to put it up, and I think I asked another representative to put it up again, up for debate on the floor because it passed the committee, and then it has been stuck on the floor for 3-4 days.
3 to 5 days. 3 to 5 days. And no vote. I have to ask the question, what's going on? Because if you have a bill that's been in your chamber 3 to 5 days, it don't take long to get a bill out of committee. That's for sure. Then you put it up for overall general debate on the House floor. That should take probably no more than 12 hours. The next day you put it up for vote. I mean, I just have to ask the question, what's going on?
Mr. President.
I'm going to yield it over to the speaker.
Thank you. The gentleman from Michigan has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senators, I understand your problem. When I was in the Senate, I had this problem too. And I agree, this needs to be taken care of. But I also think that you shouldn't blame all of the House members, that it should be mainly put under the person that the senator from North Carolina, whoever he asked to put this bill up, should be the one being talked to. I understand it is the whole House chamber, but it's not necessarily fair to blame it on all of the House when it was this one member who was asked to put it up for vote.
Well, if I may interject here, Mr. Speaker, if you allow me to. Senator Davis, I wasn't implying that it was the entire House. And common sense says that if you have one person put up a bill in a respective chamber, it's only expected that that same person puts the bill up for vote too. I'm not saying overall in general it's the entire House's fault. I believe that, in cases where a member does not put a member that puts it up for debate does not put it up for vote, then it should go on to, in that case, in the House, the Speaker should be able to put the bill up for vote, and then in the Senate, the PPT should be able to put it up for vote. So it's not targeting the entire House. You're right. It's not fair, and but I'll say this: life isn't fair, and I'll say this: we move as a unit. And that's the one thing. In the House and in the Senate, it's not just, one person did this, one person did that. I think we have to move as a unit. That's the way it is. Okay? It's basically like saying if the president fails, we all fail. But if the president succeeds, we all succeed. So we move as a unit, and I know it may not be fair to blame it on the entire House, and I'm not saying that I'm blaming it on the entire House. But if you look at it from a perspective, whereas the House and the Senate is a unit, okay? If something doesn't get done, sometimes it may just fall on one person, but generally it may end up just falling on the entire chamber. That's the way life is.
Mr. President.
Senator Sanders.
Well, I'd just like to clarify. Actually, it was actually 6 days, but that's neither here nor there.
Ooh.
this is a matter of the whole House, in my opinion. I think even the members that are doing their job have an obligation to make sure that the members that aren't doing their job are. I think that if we, when I was in the House, me and Speaker Kenneth and former Representative San Martinez and a number of other representatives worked together to whip the entire House in shape. And I think that's what the uh, House leadership from both parties should be doing to all their members. I'm looking at, I'm looking at the House community, and I'm seeing 3 or 4 members of the House actually doing things, and that's very disappointing. I think either we need to elect better candidates or we need to start enforcing House rules on members to make sure that they are doing their job correctly. I mean, it is ridiculous that a bill can be up for 6 days in the House and not get put up for a vote or not get voted on. Or the organization in the House and in the Senate in some cases needs to be better. And we need to start actually doing things and working towards that instead of just speaking about it, because we've been speaking about it for months, and I'm probably before I was elected too, and I think it's time to start taking action on it and enforcing it on members that haven't been doing that.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to respond.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Texas has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I'd like to address how much I actually agree with the remarks from the senator from North Carolina. I, as a member of the House, have faced the problem of inactivity very, very harshly. I've put things up for a committee, and they go nowhere. I've put about, and I think I can count it, about 5 or 6 bills in committees. We'll get about 1 or 2 votes, and usually, usually just 1 vote, and it's usually because I'm a member of that committee, and I want to get it passed. But we have about 6 members of the House who are direly inactive, who don't write bills, who don't, who rarely sponsor things, and the only reason they'd sponsor it is so they seem as they're being active, who don't vote, who don't participate in committees. They are causing the downfall of the entire congressional system. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to provide an inquiry in the middle of this. Is why is this supposed to be the sergeant at arms?
Yes, it's the sergeant.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, thank you. But yeah, it's causing the whole downfall of the congressional system in the House of Representatives. Is the newly, I guess you could say, newly appointed Representative Ethan Davis hasn't been active for too long. But before him, Congressman Dom Kahn's very inactive. I could go off and name them, but I'm not going to do that because I do not believe that it is. I do not believe that it is in the right manner to do so. But the majority, the overwhelming majority of the House members are inactive, and that if we need to come up with some sort of House rule, some sort of voting frame, or something to get bills moving. Because if we are trying to do the job that we were trusted by so many people to do, how can we do that for our own constituents if we're not holding the other congressmen accountable?
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. President, can I have the floor?
Mr. Speaker.
Did the gentleman from Texas yield the floor?
Yeah, I said I yield.
Mr. President?
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania has the floor.
Now, I know we're talking about inactivity in the House, and I'll be honest with you, we do have our issues. Me personally, I proposed, I'm working on one of my major things I'm trying to get accomplished, but my first bill that I got passed, both chambers, and should be getting signed hopefully by the president soon enough. It took, I think, a week after the Senate passed it to even get passed in the House. Initially, it looked like it wasn't going to have much hope because of the inactiveness, but eventually the people who are inactive got on and decided to vote. This one representative in particular only put one thing up for vote. Their entire term. Now, granted, they could be busy in their personal lives, but I think if you're elected to House, it's your duty to at least put up 4 different pieces of legislation that you made up for a vote. And I think you should be doing more than that personally. But I think at least 4 should be during a term should be up for a vote, or at least in committee or getting started. Personally, I think it should be probably 8. And I also believe that as a house and we should make a rule that if you're inactive over a week, or not even a week, 3 days, 35 days, I would say 3 days, but we could extend that further. We could have a discussion about what days that you'll be up for expulsion of the house. And I believe that I forget what else I was going to say, but I think that should be something considered. Maybe put in the House rules book, new thing. We can make an amendment to that. I know Speaker Kenneth did a great job on that rule book, so I think if we amend that rule book and put that in, and we should probably include a voting period, and everyone who doesn't vote in that voting period, it's basically an abstention from the voting period. Thank you. I yield my floor. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, can I have the floor, Mr. President?
All right. So I hear Senator Taft. So Senator Taft.
Thank you. So I am aware that was what the congressman from Pennsylvania, I think it was, just said about. I know that was a House resolution, but as a member of this deliberation, as a participant, I'd like to comment on that. And the reason being, I don't think it's a good idea to suggest that as a rule that a representative has to propose, a set amount of legislation per term. I'm unaware of anything of any ordinance or something in real life, any law in real life that says a congressman or senator has to propose a certain amount of legislation. I think that's a dangerous precedent to set. I think it's a good idea for a senator or a representative to propose pieces of legislation during their tenure, but I don't think it's a good idea to start making rules that say that you have to. And so I think the activity, if you're not voting on bills, you're not voting on things in the House or the Senate, you are, for all intents and purposes, not participating at all. Then that's a means of expulsion. But I don't think just saying because you didn't propose legislation that you should be expelled. I don't think that's a healthy I think that's a dangerous way to go. So, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. Speaker, may I have the floor?
The gentleman from Michigan has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with all of you, but I agree with Senator Taft too on how you shouldn't be forced to write a certain amount of legislation. Should you write legislation? Of course, but you should not be forced. Now, in the terms of voting, through my terms in the House, we've had a document which showed all bills that have been put up for vote and if you have voted on them and how you voted on them. I think that and it really helped me, and I think it would help other representatives, and if the Senate decided to do that, the Senate could do it too, because then it goes through and you can see each and every bill that's been put up for vote. And of course, we need a representative that's active to be able to make this. The House clerk who's previously done this job during my tenure in the House. And I yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe the gentleman from Massachusetts asked for the floor.
That's me, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you. I was just wanting to comment on what was being brought up there by Senator Taft. I agree with that. What he was speaking on, I think that members, if they choose to be inactive, or if they choose, well, it'd be one thing if they choose to be inactive, but if they choose to not propose legislation or not participate in debate, it's frankly their own funeral, because they're going to have to pay for it when they try to run for re-election. And we've seen that happen lately as well. But on an unrelated matter, I would just like to extend a congratulations to all of the senators and senator-elects who have won their races tonight, and all of the candidates who have lost their races. I think all of them ran very good and well-spirited races and campaigns. One specifically, I would like to thank Kenneth Kionis, who has been a very good speaker of the House and a very good leader for the Democratic Party, and I think every congressman, and I think that he is what every person in this community should aspire to be like. He's one of those people who we can look to as a mold, to try and mold ourselves after, as to try and become effective in this community. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Before I give the floor to someone that wishes to speak, I will quickly like to interject that Representative McKay, I thank you for those kind words. Lifted up my spirit a bit. And I will also like to congratulate everyone who has ran a good campaign. They put their efforts. Congratulations. I look forward on working with anyone who's won this their seat, or who's keeping their seat. I expect a letter from me, and I hope to hear from you and what you want to work on. Does anyone wish to speak?
Mr. President.
Mr. Speaker.
I wanted to interject here because I have had
You may.
senators that have been wanting to talk, and I've been one of those. But Senator Sanders, did you want to speak first?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would just also like to extend my congratulations to all the senators that won, and for the people that did lose their races. They all ran phenomenal races. We had great competitive Senate elections this time, and I look forward to another competitive Senate season and House election in the coming weeks. I wanted to talk about a potential act that I kind of just thought of. What if, for more organization, we did a bill template where we had little checks at the top where it said passed House or passed Senate, signed by President, and we put those into a doc. Obviously, we'll have Senate and House clerks to keep track of the past legislation and such, but we put those into a doc where we can now see which legislation is passed, which legislation has failed, which legislation was vetoed, and that's written on each piece of legislation that goes through the Senate, so we know which legislation. I've just said that outlined why, but I also want to say that there should be no legislative requirements. It's not required that you pass legislation as a representative. You are there to represent the people of your district. If the people of your district have nothing that they need legislated, then I guess you don't do legislation, but there is always something that needs to be legislated, and there should be legislation coming out of every member. I would also just like to agree that the Senate voting record should happen. There should be a document like there was in the House 2 terms ago under Speaker Horatio. And I would also like to kind of change the topic a little bit and bring up my. All right, I'll save that. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Okay. I'm going to interject here. So, I guess I'm going to call this now SJ Res 127, which will be proposed this week. SJ Res 127 will be indeedly entitled the Congressional Accountability Act, which will indeed hold representatives and senators accountable for their activity in Congress. That is one of the most important things I've been working on the speaker with. That SJ Res 127, I believe that's the resolution. I have to check. That will be coming out this week. Really holding people accountable for that activity. I'm tired of really people complaining about activity, as well as I know all of you are. You're tired of bills not being voted on. You're tired of things not being proposed. So, with that resolution, which will be proposed, people will be held accountable for that activity. And if they are not active with the requirements of the resolution, then they will, the respective chamber will have the ability to go with the go ahead and move forward in the expulsion of the member. In terms of a bill tracker, for all of my older MEC members who were in Congress at the time, and I remember when we did this, we had a bill tracker on both chambers. It was a bill tracker which was on a spreadsheet, and it would have the name of the bill, the link, if it was passed, if it was failed, veto, things of that sort. I've actually been meaning to implement that in the Senate. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But indeedly so, that will be implemented in the upcoming term on Wednesday. That will be implemented. So those are indeed two things that you all need to look out for. We also need to ensure with the really, I want to set the groundwork, and I'm going to speak on behalf of the Senate that in amending things and adding amendments to rule books is able to be done. But with the resolution that'll be proposed, and this is specifically addressing what Representative Miller was saying, in doing that, that's why we're going to have this resolution. Once this resolution is completed, it will indeed hold people accountable. We actually have an inactive bill that's in effect right now. It's not strict enough, and that's why me and the speaker are really reforming it. It's not strict enough. It doesn't really hold people accountable for that activity. That's why we're getting rid of it and changing it around. But people will be held accountable for their activity. And with that, I believe that is all I have for right now.
Mr. President?
Mr. Speaker.
Before that, does the gentleman from Ohio yield the floor?
There's no gentleman from Ohio in this call.
Oh, my bad. Well, Senator.
I'm just gonna put this on the record, if you may. Kenneth, you're a freaking retard.
Okay, you're done. Does any member of the House of Representatives wish to speak at this time?
Mr.
The
Speaker.
gentleman from
Yes,
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania has the floor.
Okay. So are we going to change topics now? We're going to change topics in a minute, because if we're going to change topics, then I would like to propose a new topic to talk about.
I was going to propose a new topic first.
Order. You may propose.
Okay, so me and Tim Taft, we've been working on this bill. It's to help inner cities. Inner cities have extremely higher crime rate than suburbans and rural areas, and so me and Tim made a bill called Predictive Policing. It's based off of a system called PredPol. It's in Los Angeles, California, currently. And this bill aim is to decrease the crime rate by basically predicting where the next crime will happen, and then that will send units, police officer units out to that specific area to go patrol around, and that will most likely deter crime from happening. So it's in the chat. I'll post it again if you need to see it. And if we want to just talk about it here, but I was approached by a member, a constituent of my district, who brought more knowledge about the high crime rate in inner cities, and so my goal is to help that constituent and decrease the crime rate, and maybe we could also get working on a bipartisan solution to prison and the prison system to reform it. Maybe make halfway houses more available to people with low tendency who don't commit that much crime in their prison. Now, I think we should also take a look at what is legal and illegal in prison, because as there are things that aren't allowed in prison for the safety of them, but there's a bill called to allow vapes, which vaping does help prisoners, and it's one of the more expensive items. I think it costs about $20-$30 to buy in prison. And the prisoners really enjoy that. So I think we need to take a whole look at the prison system, see what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed. But I think we need to also take a look at predictive policing, and also to deter crime from even happening in the first place. I think this would be a very important bill to get passed, and I hope that every representative and senator would gladly take a look at it, let me know their thoughts and what we should change in order so we can get this bill to be passed. And hopefully, like the aim of it is to deter crime from even happening in the first place, so we don't have our prison systems overloaded with prisoners. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I'd just like to talk on. Well, thank you, Representative Miller, for bringing up the prison vape topic. That's actually the topic I was going to bring up. So I'm glad that you spoke first. I'd just like to speak a little bit on the Federal Prison Vape Act, because I know that it passed the Senate, but there was some criticisms and misunderstandings about what the bill did. Some people thought, some members of Congress thought this bill legalized cigarettes in prison, and that we were going to be giving out cigarettes for free for some reason. But this bill actually legalizes the use of vapes in prison, and vapes cost $15, and there are companies specifically designed for companies that produce vapes that are specifically designed for prison that don't have any parts that can be made for into weapons, and having vapes in prison decreased the violence, and it made lives for the guards and the prisoners better in the 33 prisons that have it in their system right now. It decreases violence because the people that go into jail, a majority of them are drug offenses. We've already known that, and we're going to be working to fix that. So these people are addicted to opioids. They're addicted to cigarettes. They are prone to violence when they are taken off these things cold turkey, as it's so called. And I think giving them the option to still have nicotine and giving them that release would significantly decrease not only gang violence and the black market sale of cigarettes, but it would increase the quality of life in our prisons, and that's what we need to be addressing, like Representative Miller said. And I'm going to be working with him to do that, and looking into the other things that we can legalize, and other practices in jail that are wrong, that are decreasing the quality of our prisons. I mean, you look at a prison like in Scandinavia, you see that it's more of a holding facility, like for the minimum security prison, of course, but it's more of a holding system than it is a hellhole like our prisons are. I mean, if you actually go into our prisons, a majority of them are places that no human being would want to be. I mean, it dehumanizes them, and it once they come out, they don't know how to interact with the real world, and then you create a infinite loop of people going to prison, and then it's just a revolving door. And we have to avoid that, and we have to decrease the amount of people in our prison system because we are overflowing right now. In the 90s, the crime bill exponentially increased the prison population for people with drug offenses and for people who commit nonviolent crimes that, in my opinion, if they're victimless, shouldn't be a crime. And I know Senator Taft agrees with me mostly with that, and I think that we have to take bold steps on this because this is an issue facing many Americans that are now scared of the police because of the aggressive tactics that the government has been using against them. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like the floor.
I believe that the the gentleman from Massachusetts asked for the floor a while ago.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief, Representative Stevens. So you can just just wait a few minutes and I'll be done. I just wanted to pledge my support for the potential bills that Senator Sanders was bringing up there. Specifically, I wanted to make perfectly clear my stance that I think that we should be getting to a point in our society and in our country where we need to stop treating our those who are incarcerated as if they are monsters, and we need to start moving forward with them as citizens and as fellow countrymen. I think that we are at too pivotal a point in our nation's history where we can ignore them and treat them as second-class citizens. I think that it's time to move forward, and I agree with him that we need to be taking bold action. I also wanted to just bring up a small point here about, I had it written down here. Just give me one moment, Mr. President. I apologize. Oh, yes. My infrastructure program, as most of you more than likely know, me and former Representative Hammond worked on, and we eventually passed the Rapid Transport Act, which significantly reformed our nation's railways, and I think that it was a drastic step forward. However, I just wanted to say that I think that there's more work to be done, and I would like to see some other senators and representatives come forward and pledge their support for a new, bold 21st century infrastructure, and to see us taking those necessary steps forward in improving our roads, our bridges, and other types of infrastructure. So thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Texas may have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to respond to a few of the comments made by the senator from North Carolina and the representative from forget your home state, I think Massachusetts. First of all, the senator from North Carolina said that right now we're making prisons a place where no one wants to be. Now, while I'm a sponsor of the Vape in Prisons Act, because I recognize that a lot of these prisoners who are going in are violent because of their addiction towards drugs. They need something to kind of take that out on to stop prison riots and prison fights, and it makes sense. But what doesn't make sense is trying to make prisons all cushy and a place where it's like a 5-star or even 4-star hotel. The point of prisons is to be a rough place. It's a punishment for people who have committed crime. It is their debt to society.
Oh boy.
And I think
Mr. Speaker, I request the floor after this point is finished.
Actually, Mr. President,
you guys are kind of
correctly-
interrupting me.
The gentleman will suspend. The gentleman of Texas has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, the senator from North Carolina did say that we're making it a place where no one would want to be. That's the point. We don't want people to be in prison. It's supposed to be a deterrent. That you go there, you get locked away in something that is damn near a hellhole, where you're constantly seeming under threat, where you have bad food, where you don't have the freedoms that you have in the real world. That's the point. You committed crime, that's where you go. Now, while I do agree that we need to uphold the infrastructure because we can't have prisons that are falling down for obvious security reasons and the safety of the prisoners, I do not believe that we should make them cushy facilities to where you don't learn why you can't go back there. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
Mr. President,
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. President,
Mr. Speaker, Mr. President.
Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me just say to the representative from Texas, that's not what I said. I didn't say that prison should be a cushy place. But I also say if prison was like a motel level of comfort, if you were stuck in a motel room for 3 years or 4 years, it would not be as cushy as you think. It still turns into a prison. It is still you're still trapped in a small space, and it's not a cushy place. Whenever you're taken out of society and put into a facility where you're blocked off for a long period of time, that's not a cushy place. No matter how lavish it is, humans are meant to be out and moving around, and keeping them in one spot turns their mentality into it has a tendency to turn a person's mentality into psychopathic tendencies, and that's been proven over and over again. And you can even look to again Sweden to show that fact. When people are in Swedish jails for 15 years in solitary confinement in those one small rooms, however nice they are, they do come out with mental issues, and they do have problems readjusting to society anyway. But our prisons right now are like hellholes. They are dangerous, gang-infested places where crime still exists, where the people who go in have a lifestyle of crime, and they continue that lifestyle of crime within prison. That's not what we should be doing. We should be rehabilitating people in prison and making sure that when they come out, they realize that a life of crime and the path that they're taking is not the only path, and they have a chance in the free market society to make a company, to become an entrepreneur, to go to school, to get an education, to get their GED, and actually start making something of themselves. Right now, our prisons don't teach them that, and that is the problem with our prisons, and that's what we should be doing to reform our prisons. And I was going to continue, but I will yield the floor for the representative from Massachusetts, as he has to go quickly.
Mr. Speaker, may I be recognized?
The gentleman of
I
Massachusetts.
yielded the rest of my time, so you're good.
Thank you. The gentleman of Massachusetts has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to say, I cannot stand by and listen to what Representative Stevens just said and not interject, because that way of thinking is so backwards and so irresponsible. That is the reason why we have people coming out of prison and going right back in, because they aren't given a fair shake after they get out. The point of prison is to rehabilitate members of our society who go and have made mistakes, so they can go into prison, pay their debt to society, get out, and learn from those mistakes and move forward. By creating a quote hellhole situation for prisoners of this country to live in, I think it's especially those who've committed victimless crimes, I think is extremely irresponsible. And I think that it goes to show why we have such a high return rate when it comes to prisoners getting out of prison and going right back in. I think that it's not a very good time, I think, undisputedly, to be a prisoner in the United States. I think that although incarceration is not meant to be fun, I think, obviously, nobody's saying that it's supposed to be fun, but I think that there's a balance between not being fun and a hellhole. I think that I think that the representative and everybody else should recognize that. I think that there should be a balance between strict sentencing guidelines and I think there should be a combination between you know, where we are right now as people going into prison, and like the Senator Sanders said, going into, somewhere that is not remotely what a superpower of the world should be putting their prisoners through, treating them like second-class citizens. I think there should be a balance between that and a 5-star hotel. And to say that it's either one or the other, I think is completely ludicrous, and it's a ludicrous thing to suggest. I think that we need to be making bold steps forward, and I think that the representatives' backwards way of thinking on this issue is extremely disheartening and concerning to me, and I'm sure many others, because I think that something that, as I just mentioned before he went, we're getting to the point where we're dehumanizing these individuals when they go into prison. They're going into prison, and because of these laws and this noise, this rhetoric by members from all sides, may I say. I'm not accusing one party over another of doing this. It's multiple individuals. It's not just Representative Stevens. However, I think that the way that this has been brought forward and the way that we treat those who have made mistakes, are going to prison to pay for those mistakes, to pay their debt to society, the way we're treating them is not the way that we should be treating citizens of the undisputed superpower of the world in the 21st century. I think that it is inhumane, and I think that it is unconscionable to suggest otherwise. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, can I have Mr. President?
Senator Taft.
Thank you. Okay. So first thing I want to comment on, I'm just going to briefly comment on the exchange between the House Minority Leader and the other representatives and senator, is that I think there's sometimes a focus. There's really four purposes of prison. There's the number one purpose of prison is retribution. So basically, that is what I think what the representative from Texas brought up, which is basically punishment. That's a part of it. It's your retribution to society. The second part is incapacitation, which is the idea of incapacitating the no longer allowing that person to do harm to society. The third is deterrence, which is to set a precedent that deters that kind of crime. And then the fourth is what the representative from Massachusetts brought up, which is rehabilitation. These are all parts of what prison is. So, no, prison isn't supposed to be a comfy, cushy place, but that doesn't mean we have to focus all of our efforts only on punishment. There is a degree that has to do with rehabilitation. It's all a balance. So that's all I'm going to comment on that. And then as far as I wanted to bring up, we talked about earlier the House and the Senate and the bills that we're trying to get through. I have a bill that Representative Crosby and I have authored. It's been stuck in the House since April, April 21, the 21st of April 2019, I believe. It's called the Nuclear Energy Possibilities and Awareness Act. I'd like to get a discussion on this during this session, but that bill is still stuck in the House, and it has been put up for vote twice already, I think, and they haven't gotten enough votes to pass it. I don't know the official what is officially going on with that, but that Representative Crosby says that it is not passed despite it has not been voted enough. None enough representatives have voted on it for it to pass in either time. And then also, I'd like to. I'm going to be writing a bill, I think, to officially legalize heroin, and I'd like to get a discussion going on that. And with I'd like to hear the opinions of my fellow senators and representatives. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Speaker, I would like the floor.
Mr. President, you have the authority
Order.
at this time.
Order. The gentleman from Pennsylvania has the floor.
now me and my fellow representative from Texas, we have a lot to agree on. But what I disagree on is that, of course, prison, of course, is a place to get punishment. It's for punishment, but rehabilitation is key. Do you know what? In European countries, just like Germany, 76, the incarceration rate is 76 per 100,000 people. And in Netherlands, it's 69 per 100,000 people. Well, in the US, it's 693 per 100,000 people. Now, that's a huge difference, a stark contrast to those two countries. And look at Finland and Norway, you'll see the same thing. We're obviously doing something wrong. And I don't think punishment necessarily is the right way. Of course, they need to get punished, but I think we also need to focus on rehabilitation, like the other representatives agree. All right, those people in Germany, low-risk prisoners in Germany are allowed to leave 1 day a week, occasionally. So, they're allowed to have visitors basically any time. They get rooms nicer than I sleep in. And yet their incarceration rate is so low compared to ours. Now, we're a bigger country, of course, but it's still very low compared to ours. So we're obviously doing something wrong. And now to Representative Tim Taft's bill idea of legalizing heroin. Don't tell my wife I thought it was legal already. No, just kidding. No, I think that'll be an interesting idea. Now, do you have any statistics, if I may ask a question to Tim Taft? Do you have any statistics backing up why we should legalize heroin?
May I have the floor to address that, Mr. President?
You may.
Okay, so that's a kind of a vague notion, the statistics in support of my opinion on legalizing heroin. I don't really know what kind of statistic you're looking for. I could bring up statistics, on
how bad is heroin? Like a statistic of how bad. What does it do to your body?
Oh, heroin is. Let me see. I'm gonna try to pull up some of the exact, exactly what it is. But it's heroin is also known as diamorphine, and it is an opioid. So most commonly used as a recreational drug for its euphoric effects. It is used medically in several countries to relieve pain or an opioid replacement therapy. Heroin is a very addictive drug. It's a very bad drug, and I'm not at all pushing a pro-heroin narrative here. What I'm saying is that we need to seriously consider ending the drug war, and I don't think the U.S. government has the has the ability to. I don't think that has a capacity to deal with the problems associated with drug abuse. With most drugs, I'm on the fence about legalizing all drugs. I think that this drugs that literally cause you to go out and be aggressive. Those are drugs should be kept illegal, but drugs like heroin, where it can do significant damage to, it can do significant self harm. If you're just if the drug makes you go out and and attack people or influences you to do that, those kinds of drugs are more likely to, in my opinion, they should be banned as opposed to drugs that you just make you high and and you don't, as long as you don't hurt anybody else. That's my opinion. I don't really know I don't really know what kind of statistics to bring up on that, but I definitely think ending the drug war. There are enough statistics on the drug war and the effect that that's had, that legalizing heroin is
Okay, so you're saying that it could be helpful in medical purposes.
That is a suggestion. I'm not really suggesting that. I'm saying that we should just legalize it regardless.
Okay, now that'll be an interesting notion. I know Portugal has legalized drugs. Do you know what the rate of recidivism? Do you know, like, the rate of recidivism? Did it increase? Did it decrease? Like incarceration?
It decreased by a lot, didn't it?
Did drug deaths increase? Did they decrease at one point?
It decreased by 20. Drug usage decreased by 20%. I think it was in Portugal. I don't know for certain. I had to bring up the statistics.
Okay, I think I know what you're talking about. I heard that statistic before. Now I think that's a very progressive idea, but I think all ideas should be considered if it would help the better portion of our population not be in our prison systems, and again have a lower chance of using those. Now, we could also probably destroy the cartel. Okay, no, please don't come kill me. I like being alive. Anyways, because if we legalize them, it would. I think the idea is that it would decrease the chance of people wanting to use them, because it's illegal. People want to use them. If I'm not mistaken, the argument is. Now, it's not a bad argument, but I think, if we would potentially decriminalize all drugs, I think it would hinder some very strong people's organizations in and out of the United States. That would be a good thing per se. It would help our border officials a lot. Probably decrease illegal crossings at the southern border. I know last year I made a bill about immigration. Along with that, I think maybe don't grab your pitchforks. Maybe we could extend a layer of fences across the border in places where there's high illegal crossings. All right, but to Tim Taft's idea, I think it's a very interesting concept. I heard a little about the concept before. I don't think it necessarily will be a bad thing, but I think we have to learn more statistics supporting it, and look at Portugal or see what the effects of that had. It use Portugal as like a guinea pig. Well, not literally, but you get what I'm trying to say. And maybe if I think another country also legalized all drugs. I may be mistaken, but we need to look at all those, see what happens, see the effects of legalization. And I'm not saying I'm against it, but I think it's an interesting idea, an idea that we may need support in order to provide a better public welfare, to provide for the public welfare better, protect our citizens better, like we are entrusted to do every day under oath. Mr. Speaker, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, can I have the floor to clarify something? Can I have the floor to clarify something?
I'd like
President, I ask for the floor after Senator Taft.
Yeah, I just like to clarify.
I'd also like
the chamber will be in order. Senator Taft.
Thank you. So all I wanted to say, and so I thank you. I'd like to thank the representative Mr. Miller for his comments on it, his willingness to research it. I would like to point out though that my argument for why we should legalize heroin is not because I think it would decrease usage. Although I think that would be an added benefit. My argument is that I believe in individual. I believe in individual choice, and as long as your decision is not hurting somebody else, which is why I said that if there's a drug that influences you to go out and harm other people, that drug should probably be illegal. I said that for drugs that do not influence you to go out and hurt other people, those drugs, in my opinion, should be legal because I don't even think the government has the ability to deal with the problems associated with those kinds of issues. So I just want to say that as far as heroin goes, it's like I think that it's important for the government to step back, and I think that affecting legalizing it, it probably would affect very well bring drug usage down in America like it did in Portugal when they legalized all drugs, but that would just be an added benefit. That wouldn't be that would not be my main argument for it. So, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr.
President.
Speaker, I'd like the floor.
Mr.
If
President.
Speaker will check his PMs, he knows what's about to happen.
Yes. Terrell, if you want to.
We'll take one last one and then wrap it up.
Mr. President.
Mr.
So,
Speaker,
We'll take two.
One last one.
We'll take two
on the part of the Senate. One last one on the part of the
Yes, we'll take two.
Senator Sanders.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to express my support for Senator Taft's proposal. I agree with legalizing some drugs, drugs that again don't hurt or affect another person, and they are personal choices. I mean, I'm sorry, drugs are personal choices, and if someone chooses to use an illicit substance, then I think that the government shouldn't bar them from doing that. I mean, in many cases, substances like heroin or hallucinogenics like LSD, shrooms, or MDMA have been proven to help anxiety, depression, deep-seated trauma, uh, and have been a method of therapy for many across the country. And legalizing these drugs and allowing for better research into these drugs would give us a clearer picture of what they actually do to the body, what their effects are on the mind, how we can tell if someone is using these drugs while driving or using machinery, a way for police to know if they are doing that. And legalizing drugs also fixes the drug war problems that we've been having since the 70s. It would address a significant amount of gang violence, which would be decreased in the inner cities. It would decrease inner city crime in general, which has been proven in Portugal and other countries that have legalized many drugs. It would decrease drug smuggling across the border, where we would now be helping Mexico because our drug policies in our country don't only affect our country, they affect countries in South America, and they bring them down. And now Mexico has a serious crime problem where effectively cartels and gangs are running the government, and they have more influence than big oil lobbies in the Mexican government. And legalizing drugs would fix that problem and significantly help one of our closest allies to the south. It would decrease drug usage. That has been again proven in the countries that have done it before and in the past, and because people would have a clearer view of what the drugs do, and they would be able to make a better choice of, well, should I take this or should I not? What does this do to my body? Is this actually right for me? And then it would also decrease use among children, because they would also have a clearer idea of what they do. Because right now, children that take drugs or drink alcohol have misconceptions, because the facts that they are learning aren't from school. They're not listening to what we are telling them because they don't believe us, because we've been telling them that cannabis is horrible for them and that you shouldn't use it, and it kills your brain cells and it makes you a bad person. Then they use cannabis and it doesn't do that to them, and then they think we're lying, and then they're like, oh well, maybe they're also lying about heroin, and then they try heroin, and then that's actually a horrible drug for you, and then they're addicted to it, and then they die. So legalizing drugs and being able to teach these kids the real facts about these drugs and what they do to their body allows for them to make the right decision in school, and to hopefully not take these drugs. The legalizing drugs decreases the prison population significantly, where more people are now in prison for marijuana or a nonviolent crime than they are for a violent crime. And I think prison, in my opinion, should be almost solely for violent criminals and for um, crimes with victims, and victimless crimes should be treated as a slap on the wrist, essentially, by the federal government. Uh, Legalizing drugs hurts big pharma, which should be a goal of the Congress, because big pharma has monopolized on a lot of uh, really life-changing drugs, and they have also squashed the development and research into life-changing drugs that could hurt their market and their potential, and legalizing drugs uh, stops their influence on that. But I also want to address what Representative Miller said, and I think he proposed a fence. Um, I hope Representative Miller knows that there are options like high-tech security, where we can put surveillance and increase border patrol and have a 21st century border where we use drone technology and really update our immigration, our border security tactics, instead of continuing to push for an archaic solution like a fence. But with that, Mr. President, that's all I had to say. I yield the floor to
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Speaker,
if
Mr.
I
Speaker,
Mr. Speaker.
I will be
Mr.
extremely
Speaker,
brief.
I've been
I
asking
just want to.
for a while now.
I believe
I will.
check in the chat. I
Terrell.
did
in order.
first.
Dad.
No.
Well, we will be in order, and I will be enforcing this. There's already been one statement on the part of the House of the Senate as the final statement. There will be one last statement made on the part of the House, and that will end this congressional deliberation.
Yes, I believe that I asked.
No, I asked.
If you
The
check the
speaker,
chat,
the
I
speaker
asked
will
for it.
recognize the gentleman that is supposed to speak.
Give me 1 second. The gentleman from Massachusetts
I asked
requested.
in the call, but okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to, and I would move that we allow Mr. Stevens to speak, because I will be extremely brief here. However, I did ask for the floor before him. All I wanted to say was, I on the issue of border security, I have a 3-point plan for this issue. I support addressing asylum applications. I think that there is a growing concern, and that we have at our southern border, that there is far too many people applying for asylum that are going undealt with, and I think that we need to deal with that. The second issue, or the second point of that plan, would be more secure ports of entry for people trying to come in through the southern border. And the third, of course, as Senator Sanders brought up, was investing in technology and additional personnel. So drones and additional border security forces. I think that I agree with Senator Sanders here that we need to start moving away from archaic solutions like a wall or a fence. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. So, Mr. Speaker, I yield the floor.
Mr. Speaker, may I quickly say something?
The gentleman from Texas has the remainder of the the remainder of the time from the gentleman of Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, there were a lot of different things that I didn't have a chance to respond to, so I'd like to go over them. First of all, is there were some claims made by many different members here on this floor that I didn't support rehabilitation. Well, that's completely false. As a matter of fact, if you look into my hearing for my confirmation when I was being nominated to be Attorney General, I was asked that question, what I believe we should do about minor offenses and prison reform. And I said that we should reform to focus on rehabilitative packages. So we're trying to lead people in a positive direction. But at the same time, and I'd like to go ahead and clarify, because I admit I must have sounded off of what I meant to try and convey. It's just that I do not believe that we should exactly make prison a comfortable place. That's what I meant, is a place where people are okay with going there, where they don't mind going there. I think instead we should make it a place where we discourage people to go, but if they do unfortunately wind up there, that there is, as I agree, should be some form of retributive package to where they can go back and become a functioning member of society. Now, I'd also like to address the bill that was proposed by Senator Tim Taft from Wisconsin. You know, when he said that he would like to address another bill of his, I perked up because he's a very smart man. He's, as a matter of fact, running for president, and I think this nation would be well served by him. But I found myself agreeing with about 98% of his policy. We're both fairly libertarian when it comes to government issues, most social issues, and economic policy. But I couldn't help but laugh when he said legalize heroin. I honestly thought he was joking, because there are several reasons why we cannot legalize heroin. And the first of which I would like to say is the claim that was made by several members here on this floor that using heroin hurts nobody but the person using them is completely false. Now, Senator Taft, let me name you exactly who is hurt by the use of heroin. The family members, when they come to find their beloved family member on the floor, puking and dying because of the use of heroin. It doesn't only affect them, it affects their family members. And for the federal government to condone and legalize the usage of these drugs is completely reprehensible. And I do not believe it is any form of a step that the federal government should take. Now, while I believe, and I've said this publicly, that I support the recreational and medicinal use of marijuana, as a matter of fact, also the medicinal use of all drugs, if they are able to help, I do not support the recreational use of heroin. And why? Well, right now, Mr. Speaker, we are living in an opioid epidemic. As a matter of fact, just in the year of 2016, there were over 42,000 people who died from using heroin. Let me say that again. 42,000 of your and my constituents died by using heroin. And the move by Senator Tim Taft would only allow that number to grow. Now, many different members have used Portugal as an example, saying that they legalized all drugs. That is completely false. They decriminalized it, but turned it into a social issue. It's still illegal, and if you're caught, you do have to face some sort of punishment, but it isn't as harsh. I would support something like that. I believe that the current criminal standards that are on drug usage are not progressive in the judicial form. As a matter of fact, they're only causing the drug use to be worse, and we're not allowing for education. But I do not believe that we should just flat out legalize them and not even care. Now, if we were to legalize them in a medicinal manner, that would be one thing, because then it would be using for the good of the people. They would be able to have medical institutions that would be able to refine these drugs to be better to combat diseases that we haven't been able to find better solutions for, such as cancer. But if we were to flat out allow anybody to use these with no punishment, it's only going to make that rate go up. It's only going to make the number of people dying, the number of people having opioid disorders. As a matter of fact, according to the National Health and Human Services Department, over 2.1 million people have suffered disorders after using opioids and heroin. Another great detriment from the uses of opioids and heroin. Now, as a matter of fact, Portugal also still has faced a good amount of deaths. As a matter of fact, they have faced around 2,700 deaths. Now, while that not is nearly as much as the United States, they also still have a fraction of our population. So before I close and yield the rest of my time, and we close this congressional deliberation, I would just like to focus on the point that while yes, we can have the conversation about legalizing opioids and heroin for medicinal uses, legalizing them for recreational purposes would be reckless. Now, the senator from North Carolina said that we are not teaching our constituents and our children to be able to not use drugs, and that somehow by legalizing them, it would make it even better. This is just showing a flawed logic. Now, I have great respect for the senator from North Carolina. As a matter of fact, when I was a representative from District 5, I voted for him to be vice president. Even though we have major policy disagreements, I acknowledge he's a smart man. But this is one area, just like Senator Tim Taft, that I heavily disagree on. Matter of fact, I think that just by legalizing these, somehow magically, students will realize that they can't use drugs because there will be more information is completely false. We have too much information on the negative effects of drug usage. I've already stated 2 statistics. As a matter of fact, I can state another one. So far, in this year of 2019, 116 people have died each day from opioid-related drug overdoses. And this number would only increase. If we want to allow for better education, we should allow for reform and allow for progressive criminal justice reform on drug uses, trying to steer people in the right direction, but not flat out legalizing it. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, can I please have the opportunity to respond to him for a minute before we close it?
You may, but we're going to wrap it up.
Okay.
Senator Taft, I'm going to give you 5 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just very quickly. Okay, so Representative Steves, I'm not going to be able to respond to everything he said because I only have a short amount of time, and I really want to make this short. But he brought up the fact that I think it was 120 people. I don't remember exactly what he said died each day from opioid-related deaths. So I'd like to bring up the fact that 1,300 deaths every day in the U.S. from cigarette smoking. Are we going to ban cigarettes now? Also, alcohol and alcohol use and cigarette usage, the addictions, those also affect the families of people. I'm not taking this lightly by saying that, we should just legalize heroin and, I don't care about the families at all. What I'm saying is that the government doesn't have the ability to deal with the problems associated with these types of drugs. And when I said hurt, I didn't mean it didn't have an effect on the people around them. I said that what I meant was that drug does not influence you to go out and actually physically assault other people. And all of these problems associated with are very unfortunate, and I don't think that we don't have other steps we can take to make the problem better, to decrease the problem. What I am saying though is that we can't just go, you can't just assume that the government has the ability to deal with all these problems. And like I said, more people die from cigarettes every year than they do from heroin usage. I believe that is the case. Like I said, there are 480,000 deaths per year from cigarette smoking. Does the representative from Texas want to ban smoking now? Now, I'm going to go on to a lighter note before I yield the rest of my time. Like I said, I agree with the representative from Texas on a lot of things. I think I consider him a friend, and we both agree on a lot of things, and I think he is a good representative who's doing a good job, and I definitely consider him an ally in all things, but I just really sincerely disagree with him on this issue. I don't think that use of government force, I don't think that the government is equipped to try to deal with this problem and to try to infringe upon people's the individual choices. So thank you, Mr. President. I yield the rest of my time.
Terrell, if you want to close up, I'll be fine with that.
All right. Yeah, so that concludes this congressional deliberation. Thanks for watching, and we are hereby adjourned.